The following is an account of an experience that I had in September of 2022, after many of the events that coincided with the major breakup of the Doctrine of Christ Group. On Thursday, September 8th, 2022, at the cottage meeting, I prayed to know what I needed to do to offer a broken heart and contrite spirit that I might receive the baptism of fire and of the Holy Ghost. I received, quote, "forgive them," and the meaning was brought to my mind that it pertains to those who have dissented from Phil, myself, and the Doctrine of Christ Group. I have been working on forgiving them for several weeks and have felt that for all intents and purposes, I have forgiven them and let go of animosity toward them. Nevertheless, I considered that the Spirit knew my own heart better than I did, so I committed to accomplishing that. During the next few days, I asked the Lord what I needed to do to forgive them that I had not considered. Different options came to mind, but nothing really settled. I came to the conclusion that I needed to take the matter to my altar in prayer. I also had a discussion with Phil about it to see if he had any ideas or impressions. While we prayed, I asked about if that admonition to forgive them came from Father, as I sought what sacrifice I needed to give. Through a series of questions, I initially got a response that it was not from him, that I had forgiven them, and that this was a distraction to keep me focused on something that I had already done instead of focusing on what my next task was. But finally, in asking if I had been asking with sufficient real intent, and if I was understanding correctly, I received the answer that I needed to go to the altar and ask about it as I had planned. As I went to my altar thereafter, I knelt and prayed to know what I needed to do to forgive them according to this commandment. As I knelt and received instruction, a vision came to my mind, seeing 8 of the leading voices of the dissenting group, namely Dustin and Melly Grady, Ariane Nemelka, Jacob Isbell, Dustin and Maren Smith, and Josh and Amy Choate. I saw them in a lineup side by side in front of me and facing back at me. It was experienced somewhat in the same manner as a normal forgiveness exercise that I have gone through, but there were extra factors that happened during the vision. As I saw them, I perceived that nearly each person As I saw them, I perceived that nearby each person, associated with each one, there was a sort of shelf with cubby holes. Also associated with each person, sitting on the shelf in one of the cubby holes, was a black orb. I approached each person one by one without speaking to them, and without speaking to them, I simply collected each black orb and brought it back to put in a pile in a satchel that had appeared related to this collection. It was notable to me that the sizes of the black orbs were variable depending on the person. The orb I received from Jacob's shelf was at least 4 times bigger than the next biggest one, approximately the size of a basketball or a little bigger. I believe Ariane's and Dustin Grady's were the next biggest, maybe the size of softballs, tapering down from there in size to Melly's, then the Smiths, then the Choates, which were both smaller than a baseball. While I was doing this, again, no one spoke, but they all watched me, and we made eye contact. When I had collected all of the orbs, my perspective turned to the right. I saw a very long, possibly 1 to 2 miles, white curving staircase that went upward. And I knew that was a path to walk to Jesus Christ to give these offerings to him. My perspective was third person, and I watched glimpses of the journey along that staircase or path that seemed like it would take a while to traverse. The time and perspective jumped to when I came to the top of the stairs and knelt before Jesus Christ, who was waiting for me. I took the orbs and laid them in a line on an altar before him. Each one, somewhat in the pattern that happened with the brother of Jared, he motioned his hand over each one and it turned from black to a glowing white orb. I had the impression while this was happening that this was representing the replacement of resentment with charity. Once the transformation was complete with each of the 8 orbs, I collected them again and turned back to return to the place where I was standing before each of these people. The difference, however, was that the staircase was now a lot shorter, only about 10 or 15 steps from where I was with Jesus Christ to the floor where I was standing before each of them. As I descended the staircase and stood before them, I approached each one with their respective orb. As I handed each person the orb that was related to them, I said and meant the words, quote, "I forgive you. I love you. Will you please forgive me for the hard feelings I've had against you?" I don't recall that any of them actually responded, but all remained silent, looking at me with different levels of indifference and annoyance. But I told myself that it didn't matter because this exercise was about what I needed to do, not about what they needed to do. Once I finished with them, I turned around and saw myself standing about 10 paces in the opposite direction. As I walked up to and faced my other self, I first saw my other self clothed in regular clothing. Then in an instant, my other self stood before me disrobed. I began to say to my other self, "Jeffrey, I forgive you. Jeffrey, I love you. Jeffrey, will you please forgive me for my hard feelings?" While I was saying these words, I placed individual pieces of a white garment upon my other self until my other self stood fully clothed in a white robe. To my question, my other self answered lovingly in the affirmative. Then there was an unspoken understanding between my other self and I that we should unite, becoming one person. During this interaction, I was also wearing regular clothing, but once there was this unspoken understanding and agreement to unite, then I saw my clothing changed, and now I was also in a white robe. Then my other self and I walked toward each other and became one. At this point, clothed in white raiment, I approached and ascended the staircase back up to the altar and Jesus Christ. As I knelt at the altar, with him standing on the other side, I then motioned my hands in front of my chest and pulled out this new orb that represented my hurt and resentment. The orb was a swirling, cloudy gray color, which I didn't physically touch, but which was floating between my hands. I then motioned my hands forward to offer it to Christ and said, "I don't want to carry this anymore. I don't want to feel hurt toward these people." As I offered it, and it floated forward away from my hands and toward him, I felt this sensation of peace and freedom as I let my arms fall to my sides. When the orb floated in front of Jesus, as he motioned over it with his hands, it first turned from the swirling gray color to brilliant white. Then he transformed it from an orb into a disc, and then from a disc into a pillar of white light, which he then placed upon me. As he placed it upon me, I heard the word in my mind, "soon." There was an understanding that accompanied it, that as this was an offering, as part of the sacrifice of a broken heart and contrite spirit to receive the baptism of fire and of the Holy Ghost, the understanding was that I would receive the baptism of fire and of the Holy Ghost soon, and then followed the words, "Keep going." There are some following experiences that accompany this that I will be sharing in future videos. Thank you for watching.